Hi everyone, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and I hope that you're doing well. I'd like to share a few thoughts about Day In, Day Out by Héctor Aguilar Camín. This is Camín's second novel that's been translated into English, and it's a crime novel set in his native city of Mexico City. It's one of those crime novels that's really about one's past, the idea that we have some interaction at some point in our lives, often with a friend, a family member, a former lover, and that interaction reveals an uncanny truth about our past, and it allows us to have this sort of cascade of memories, not unlike what Proust was going for in Search of Lost Time, or numerous other authors have worked with that conceit. But within a crime novel, it's usually this idea that something happened in the past that we've chosen to forget, or that we haven't necessarily thought about from a particular perspective, and suddenly it shifts, and suddenly all of those ideas are brought back, but they're brought back in new detail, and new connections are revealed. And that's what happens to the narrator Serrano in Day Out. We open with him going to the funeral of a government functionary, and while there, he sees a couple of friends, and he sees a man he hasn't seen in a very long time. And it leads to this sequence of memories around a woman they were both associated with, a woman they both loved, a woman they both had romantic interactions with. And from there, it begins to focus on this idea that he remembers something. He remembers a story that she once told him while they were both drunk after a party, in which she said she'd had a man killed once. And as the book unravels, we start to see that Serrano has basically been obsessed with this story for a number of years, and he's so scared of the story and the truth that may reside there that he, in a sense, was willing to forego his relationship. And he made up various reasons about how he wasn't good enough or wealthy enough for Liliana, the woman who had given this, confession to him. But in reality, it's very clear that he's just frightened of what that truth could mean, not just about her, but about his own life and about their relationship. And towards the end, Camín has this statement. He goes, when Felo Fernandez and Liliana come into my studio with curious looks on their faces, it occurs to me that there's a fine but unbreakable line separating close relatives on one side from friends and lovers on the other. There's also a fine inner thread that separates each of us from ourselves by age, youth from when youth ends, and from every change thereafter, until the thin thread of life can no longer hold us together. And that's what the book is really about. It's not about the crime. It's not about the society that sort of, allows this type of crime to exist. All of those ideas are brought forth in this short novel, but it's rather about those relationships. What does it mean to remember something from deep in our past that we believe has either not had an influence on us, and we can then trace its residual, thread through previous choices we made, or we believe it governed us in this almost fatalistic, deterministic way, and yet when upon reflection we realize we made so many other choices that didn't really have to do with that singular truth that we wanted to blame everything on, or that we trace all of the root causes to. And sort of trying to figure out which side of that dividing line, was that confession of a killing what caused the relationship that Serrano had with Liliana to fade? Is it something that he's been able to blame on their fading relationship rather than examining his own choices and the self-recrimination that he engages in? And so it is an interesting book that's not fully developed. And I think that is the one flaw, is it, had it been another 100 pages, had we gotten to spend a little bit more time with Serrano, with Liliana, the woman he loves, with her sister, Dorotea, who seems to have some connection to the crime as well. I don't want to spoil everything. Then I think the book would have been able to achieve what Camín was going for in that passage. Now, we do get, through this series of memories, a couple of different interesting, sort of details around life in Mexico City in the 1970s for the most part. And so we have one former police officer sharing this. Look, in those years, groups of thugs not on the police watch list popped up every 3 or 4 months. If it was a gang no one knew about, it was an anomaly we had to take care of. In those days, the police ruled the streets. We were the law, and the crooks were afraid of us. When law enforcement visited a thieves' market like Tepito, for example, small-time criminals swarmed about the comandante like flies. What's up, chief? How can we help you? Well, guys, there's been a burglar, and the lady of the house was raped. But the family's on our side, so the bastard who did it is going to get screwed. It's up to you guys to find out who it was. And they would find out. Sometimes they'd even turn in the perpetrators themselves. The squad would hand them off to the authorities, and everybody was happy. In the case you speak of, the squad uncovered one of those gangs. And so that's, that is a truth. That is a society that could exist and that could allow, someone to tell some government functionary, hey, this guy did something, we want him killed, and that can happen. But that's not entirely fleshed out in enough detail to make all of it coalesce into a novel that really as I said, achieves what Camín goes for in those ideas, in that examination that Serrano engages in, and the relationship that he has with Liliana. And so there are aspects of the novel that I thought were really interesting. I am interested in reading his other novel that's been translated in English, Death in Veracruz, which I think was regarded as a stronger book. But this is an interesting book. It reveals an author who is engaging with the crime novel in some interesting ideas, even when it's not quite fully formed. So I'd be curious to know if anybody's read any other works by Camín, because, as I said, I'll be looking for Death in Veracruz. And there are works I was reminded of. The way that there are two sisters that Serrano associates with, and the way that sort of, that there's this mystery between them and between the criminals or the criminal politicians and government men they've been involved with, certainly recalls Raymond Chandler's The Big Sleep. There are specific overtones of the book that I think Camín was going for within this. And this, I think, is manages to achieve that, even when the character development is just slightly more detailed in than what was happening with Day In, Day Out. And this, of course, is one of my favorite books. It's one of my wife's favorite books. There are elements of the way that memory is recalled and the way that a long-running relationship between a man and a woman that recall the writings of Alvaro Mutis. Specifically, I would say Ilona Comes with the Rain, more so than The Snow of the Admiral. Thinking about other crime novels that sort of dip deep into the past to reveal, some new truth that shatters, in a sense, the characters and their relationships. I thought, of course, of James Crumley's Dancing Bear. This is another one of my all-time favorites. Probably the highlight of Mountain West noir. The violence, the violence that a society can sort of permit within itself, and specifically towards women, recalls the great Dead Girls by Selva Almeida. I think this is one of the finest books of the past several years that I've read. And there are ways in which the idea of the reporter dipping in and the reporter being the investigator reminded me in some ways of 1974 by David Peace. Again, this is a very brutal, dark, nihilistic book, but it is a masterpiece, I think, in a number of ways. And then finally, I would be remiss if I wasn't thinking of the great 2666 by Roberto Bolaño, specifically the part about the crimes. And the way that we see here characters who think of themselves as intellectual, think of themselves as intellectualizing and rationalizing what's happening with crime, while not necessarily engaging with what's happening with crime on a very human level until they reach a certain, deep critical juncture within their relationship. So this is another good one. So let me know, as I said, if you've read Death in Veracruz or other works by Camín, and I hope everybody's doing well. Thanks.